Welcome to the Esoteric Beat. People often ask me about the secret, and I'm happy to tell you. Beats me. My guest today is John Ohno, who you may know on Twitter as @NKV, also on Instagram, right? Correct me if I've got your handle wrong.
NKV2, like version 2. Yep.
Right, and is that a reference to Enki from Sumerian mythology, or
Yes,
specifically
yes, it is.
I know from Snow Crash?
Well, both, but I have a thing for culture heroes, so.
There you go. You want to tell me a little bit why you chose the name Enki for your handle?
It was Snow Crash.
I remember in Snow Crash, there was these cool conversations with this computer librarian, and this might be a good way to get started on our topic, which is hypertext. And so in Snow Crash, the novel by Neil Stephenson, there's this computerized librarian who the hero protagonist, has a bunch of conversations with, and he's learning about the ancient Sumerian Enki, who's kind of an allegory for code, if I got that right.
Something like that. Yeah. Well, he's kind of the primordial programmer, right? And so there's this idea of the quote unquote great May of princeship, which is the natural law, and the idea is that Enki created the natural law, and yeah. Inanna stole it and then it gave it back, and then there's a whole thing.
There's this thing called the Nam Shub of Enki, I remember, which is like this awesome spell that's gonna make things happen, and it's kind of related to Julian James's Origin of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind, which I didn't realize for years was a big influence on Stephenson writing that stuff. So John is here to talk to us about hypertext. And I'm really interested in hearing about your experiences working with Ted Nelson. So do you want to just tell us about how you got started with it, and then we'll launch into kind of what is hypertext?
So the very brief version is that I got in via media. So I watched Serial Experiments Lane, and I read Snow Crash, and I read all of the Wired magazine stuff and all of the Mondo 2000 stuff that was floating around at the time, and I got enough of a taste of the Xanadu stuff that I had a specific interest in it. But it turned out that for various reasons, what had been publicly released and kind of focused on in the media was biased, let's say, in such a way that I had a kind of a warped view of it. But I had dug up some documentation. I had written a couple projects kind of based on my understanding of some of the things that Xanadu had done, including Zigzag, which is a kind of a different project. And Ted Nelson actually saw my project being covered on a popular blog and contacted me, and I ended up working for him for a number of years. I went to his wedding. We're still friendly, and it was very nice to have that inside input, because although it's not, it used to be in the 90s that all of the, in the 80s too, that all of these Xanadu internals were really kept secret, and little hermetic kind of, or sorry, hermeneutic kind of hints, like alchemical language would float out, and then they'd be appropriated by people who were in the media, who didn't quite know what they actually meant, and they had a underlying specific technical meaning, and that's no longer the case. Xanadu doesn't really have a bunch of secrets anymore, but Ted Nelson is both very dramatic and very disorganized, and so unfortunately, the actual technical stuff was not systematically released and made systematically available.
So, for the purposes of the show, we have the esoteric side, right? Some of this stuff was kind of kept esoteric, and
Yes.
there's some problems there. And in terms of the beat side of the show, so my viewers may already know that I am the archivist for Mondo 2000 History Project, and I work with Are You Serious? And I remember, back when I was a kid reading like the Cyberpunk Fake Book and Mondo 2000, being very excited about stuff like hypertext and storytelling using computers. I think about Brenda Laurel was on the cover talking about her computers as theater project. But let's back it up for just a minute. And who is Ted Nelson and what did he contribute?
Okay, so there are kind of three different trends of hypertext, and then the first two were kind of independent and happened around the same time. One was Doug Engelbart, who was a professional engineer, and he kind of wanted groupware for professional engineers. He got government funding for his thing, and he ended up developing a number of things that were related to hypertext. And now if you hear about Doug Engelbart, people will say he invented the mouse, which isn't, it's misleading and it's not exactly true, but he didn't invent the trackball. The trackball already existed, and yeah, but his whole thing was you use computers in order to take an engineering team and make them much more effective. And he thought it would be necessary to use this kind of stuff in order to avoid nuclear war. Basically, he thought that the wicked problems of the world need to be engineered away by augmented humans, basically superhumans that were made super by their access to computing technology. Ted Nelson was in a separate domain. He was studying sociology, and he had this kind of film industry connection because he was the son of a silent movie star and like a sitcom producer, and then he also had this literature background because he had he grew up with his grandparents who were academics, and he was very interested in. And the other thing that you need to know is that he has terrible ADHD. So he was very interested in any technology that would help him organize his thoughts so that he could do I should say capture and organize his thoughts so that he could do projects like big research papers and like movies. Because in this period, you're editing on film, you had to actually edit film, and so you had to keep track of all these pieces of film, and you couldn't, you had sort of one strip, and it would be difficult to say, oh no, I don't actually want that cut there. You have to, because you actually draw on the film. And so his approach was to take computers and use computers to generalize the processes that scholars especially were already doing in order to organize information. So things like footnotes, indexes, marginal notes, citations, quoting, all of that. He thought, okay, you could have like a single computerized system, and then the computer could make it easier to follow all these things, because instead of keeping it in your head, the computer would keep it. And then kind of later on, both of these traditions got boiled down, and pieces were taken off of them until you have kind of what we think of as hypertext today, which is like the World Wide Web, and wikis have some of these features, but for the most part, the features that Ted Nelson was interested in, that he thought were core, are not available.
Can you explain a little bit more about that then? The features that Ted Nelson thought were core to hypertext are still not available in like your average website.
Right. Well, browsers themselves, out of the box, don't support some of the things he thought were very important. So one of the things he thought was very important was that links should always be unbreakable, which is to say that you have like a permanent record of all the different versions of a document. You can link to a particular version. He thought that was vital because this is like the Republic of Letters. This is like you're creating history every time you write anything. So all of that is important history that should be preserved. And if it doesn't end up being important, well, you've preserved it anyway. It's like Benjamin Franklin used to like literally file his shopping lists because he knew he was an important figure. And my mom is a historian, and she actually goes through his shopping list, and she's like figured things out that are historically important based on the fact that Ben Franklin, saved all his shopping lists. Ted was very much interested in that. So that's one thing, is the permanent documents, permanent addresses. The second thing is this concept of transclusion, which is that quoting is supposed to be done by the computer. That you're not, rather than when you're taking a quote, rather than copying the content of the quote, and then trying to do a citation, maybe you screw up the citation. You say, oh, it's supposed to be on, you say page 51, but it's actually page 35 or something, right? Very easy to screw up citations, very easy to accidentally not do citations. He thinks the computer should handle that, and not only that, the computer should handle that at the time that you're viewing it. And this kind of solves some problems with copyright, because instead of asking for permission at the time, it's like, okay, I have Men, Women, and Chainsaws on my shelf, right? And I want to quote that. Well, what I do is I have I use a system to quote that, and then everybody who already has a copy of Men, Women, and Chainsaws, it's just going to take from their copy because they have it locally. But everybody who doesn't, they will buy just the part that's quoted. So if like the price of the book is $20 and this is 1/1000th of the book, then they're going to pay 1/1000th of $20 to get this quote. And then you don't have to, this is very similar to what like Riff Tracks does, where they have the commentary and you then have to actually own the DVD, and then you play the commentary over the DVD, and therefore they don't need to get permission from the copyright holder. This is his idea of trans copyright, and it works on the same thing. But by the same logic, he thought this was how you would do editing. Is that really, when you're editing, what you're doing is you're quoting your previous version in a different order. And he connected this to the film industry idea of the edit decision list, which is a document that tells you which frame to cut on on which reel, and where to put it in the final edit. And then the third thing was this idea of parallel connections, or visible parallel. He has a bunch of different terms for this. The one I learned initially was transpointing windows, but basically it's like there's the idea of there are several different kinds of links that you could have, and the one that the web has, the only one really that most people use on the web, is what's called a jump link. This is kind of like a like an end note, or it's like choose your own adventure, where you get to a point on a page and you click something and it takes you to a completely different page. He didn't, he went over that. This is like another thing that Engelbart's system had, and so on. But he thought that was like the dumbest version of hypertext, and although it's the easiest one to understand, he was very much more interested in something that, instead of being like an end note, is more like a marginal note. And so I actually drew, there are, you know, demos of this online, but I actually drew kind of what, I don't know if you can see this.
Yeah, it's visible.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So this is the kind of thing, this is what it might look like if you had like 3 documents that were interlinked, where you actually have color-coded links. And the idea of the color coding is that you write down like a link type. So you might say disagrees with, or contradicts, or supports, or something, and then that would get turned into a color. And so you can take multiple documents and you can do your research and say, this document had this section of this document, this little paragraph, this single word, whatever, it has this relationship to this other thing. And so he was very interested in that, and that also is not on the web.
So I'm thinking about, you know, how, like on Twitter, for example, I'm always losing track of my old tweets. I'm always losing track of like a person's handle, you know, who said that thing, or, you know, I'm always trying to find something, and I search the phrase that, and I can't find it. And it's like, it seems like it's just way harder than it should be. And I thought, you know, when we were discussing this, we could talk about Hermann Hesse's novel, The Glass Bead Game, right?
Yes.
Which is a sort of precursor to hypertext, where these, was it monks are like playing this game with glass beads, but like placing in the beads, you know, sort of anything from all of civilization, right? And they're sort of playing this game, sort of like we do on Twitter when we, you know, drop a hyperlink and make a, you know, make a quotation. So if, you know, if we had access to all of these hypertext features that you mentioned, how would this improve our glass bead game?
So I don't necessarily want to say that it'll improve searchability, although Ted liked the idea of searching more so than categorization. He's kind of an anti-taxonomist, because he thinks that categorization is always going to be, especially like if it's authoritative categorization, that it's going to be very lossy. And so he was a big fan of finding the things you're working on by searching, and he wanted always have this this kind of search system. But in terms of keeping track of things, part of the issue, especially on like Twitter, is that you only really have the ability to make the kinds of links between things on Twitter that Twitter wants you to, and that is very, very limited. That's like, you can post a link to your feed and you can retweet and you can like. Well, there isn't much of anything. But I could like something for 20,000 different reasons, right? And if I want to look up something that I found, and it's 6 years later, well, I'm out of luck. In fact, with Twitter, it's even worse, because Twitter doesn't doesn't keep data fully available for very long. So if you're a massive poster like me, you're going to quickly outrun what they're even indexing for search. Something that I posted 6 months ago, I can't even search for it. But in terms of in terms of meaning making and categorization, this is kind of where his style of hypertext shines, is the idea that that you can have your own annotations for somebody else's work, and that is like the primary mode, that you're not passively consuming what an authority wants to connect together. You're making your own connections.
So there's a kind of an anarchist moral to
Absolutely.
this story here, and I'm thinking about how intellectual property and the kind of like monetizing structures of capitalism. As you were explaining to me the kind of business history of Xanadu, one of the reasons that these features of hypertext never really got out there is that, the corporations that are kind of, delivering tech to the masses, they're sort of not interested in the kind of open collaboration, the kind of republic of letters that Ted Nelson is talking about. Can you say a little bit about that?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, there's also a kind of a technical angle to that, but yes, absolutely. So I mean, it's not to say that Ted didn't have connections to the computer industry, because he did, mostly as kind of a he was like kind of like a Shingy figure, if you're familiar with Shingy, who AOL had hired to basically say buzzwords. So for a while, Microsoft and Apple both kind of brought him in to say inspiring things about the great hypertext future to employees and stuff. But people didn't really get him. And a little bit later, when they could have, they kind of weren't in favor of what he was saying. But by that point, the monetization system had already crystallized. There's a point at which the kind of thing that Ted was trying to do, which was really to circumvent the whole natural copyright system in favor of something that let you take much smaller chunks, and something that let you do free use so long as you paid for the chunks. He was really pushing for that, and he was also pushing for a kind of a federated system. He called it, in the 70s, he called it franchising. That just like there are local McDonald's owners, there would be local Xanadu owners where you'd buy the Xanadu license, and you could call yourself an official Xanadu whatever. All of that could have happened at one point, but kind of this parallel thing happened where you had first this this sort of crystallized hypertext, where an authority would kind of make a hypertext, make a set of connections, right? And then it would be crystallized, and it would be put on a disk or something, and it would be shipped out. because you basically, the community aspect wasn't technically possible unless you're at a university. So Brown University had an internal hypertext system, actually a series of them, Hess, and then something else, and then Intermedia was the Mac version. And for many years it had big communal projects. Well, and all the students would participate on a single thing. So you'd have like, they had a Victorian literature research project, and for 10 years the students would all be making connections between various works from the Victorian era and connecting that to their own essays and so on. And then at a certain point they stopped and they solidified it, and they would just send you a CD-ROM with wherever they stopped in like 93 or something. And that's actually up on the web now. I think it's the Victorian web. If you search for Victorian web, it's like a crystallized version of whenever they stopped. When you didn't have the high connectivity, the idea of social media, because that's basically what it was, is this community meaning making, that kind of wasn't possible. And you know, you did have text-based things like BBSs and like Plato nodes and so on, but that the idea of editing potentially very large pieces of text, like, you know, War and Peace or something, that was very difficult. And by the time it became feasible, well, we kind of already had the web, we already had HyperCard, we already had a number of we had Story Space, we had a number of these less powerful hypertext things that were really made for personal use combined with wide distribution. And you know, the web is especially, the web kind of took that same structure. And so you have like, the website sits on a server. And if you're right now, the you know, like, this is how Amazon makes most of their money, is they will sell you that server, and they will charge you for the server, and they will charge you for the bandwidth, and they'll charge you for the mechanisms to make sure that if too many people try to read your thing or view whatever video you're putting up there or whatever, that you won't go down. This is what Amazon Web Services is really for, is that they will sell you the option of not being kicked off the internet because too many people like your content. And Google is kind of in the same boat. This is the purpose of YouTube, right? Is that they will store your videos for you, and then serve it up to other people, and then they'll make some ad money off of that. But under the Zandu model, that wasn't the way people were going to make money. People were going to make money, like the incentive was that if you owned the thing in the first place, you would be making the money off of it. And the actual infrastructure was not the main money making thing. And once the infrastructure became the money making thing, well, you get choke points installed everywhere. And then also at the same time, when the infrastructure is tied to the content, which it is basically to make it a choke point, then ownership of like control over the content is related to your investment in the infrastructure. So like, because I own, you know, some discussion forum, I'm going to moderate the hell out of it because everybody who posts there is costing me money, right? And everybody who, furthermore, everybody who posts there is producing a legal risk for me. But in the Zandu model, there wasn't this focus on infrastructure. There's this idea, along with the federated system, that content might actually move between different nodes or be replicated. And more recently, this is like, they're new sort of peer-to-peer systems. So there are a lot of systems that are kind of like BitTorrent, so like IPFS and DAT, where viewing something really means that you get a copy of your own that's cached, and then you are hosting that copy to other people. Zandu was always very compatible with that kind of philosophy of not tying the hosting infrastructure to the cost. And so, you know, you'd kind of expect for sort of historical reasons, it's not going this way, but you would kind of expect a very modern version of Zandu to be built on BitTorrent or to be built on IPFS. Wherein the more popular something is, the easier it is to get because more people have it, and therefore there are more places to get it.
So, you know, I'm hearing that there's really this kind of rentier system set up. I've been thinking a lot about Snow Crash lately, and you know the way L. Bob Reif was sort of like Amazon, and the way he was buying up all the sort of cable companies, you know, all the infrastructure, and you know, this concept of a choke point, because you know a lot of my listeners are especially the Mondo people, are interested in sort of the democratization of the internet. And you know, at the same time, we're always just kind of like getting busy, dying, doom scrolling on our social media health.
Right.
And so how, you know, how are we going to resist this?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think distributed or peer-to-peer technologies are very important for this, in part because if nobody's making money off you, you can kind of drop out of that portion of the incentive structure. You know, Twitter has a really specific thing that it wants from me, which is that it wants me to sit there and scroll, because the more I scroll, the more likely I am to see ads. And now this actually doesn't actually follow, right? Because, okay, first off, I have an ad blocker, right? Second, but Twitter doesn't quite realize that I have an ad blocker, or doesn't, you know, that doesn't really go all the way through. Second, you know, Twitter is being paid for the ads, but paying for the ads is, Twitter is neither the buyer or the seller, it's the middleman for the ads. And the same with Google, that they're kind of they're taking somebody else's content and putting somebody else's ad on it, right? This is the whole ad tech thing, and the idea is that if you have targeted advertising where it's based on real data, it's going to be more effective, and it's very hard to prove that, simply because the thing about advertising is that most of the supposed effect is actually not captured. You can measure if somebody clicks on an ad. You can't measure whether or not they actually bought something by clicking on the ad that they wouldn't have bought had they not clicked on it. And you also can't measure whether or not they saw an ad, and then 6 weeks later, because of the ad, bought the thing. There used to be a truism in the advertising industry that you're always wasting 50% of your money on advertising, but there's no way to know which 50%. And for ad targeting, you're still wasting 50%, and you still don't know which 50% it is. It's just that you're now paying another party to promise you that they can turn it into 49%. And you kind of have no way of saying whether or not it's the case. As soon as you go off of the commercial internet, and going off the commercial internet really means not being involved in paying for centralized infrastructure, because as soon as you're in that trap of, if my thing is too popular, then I'm either going to go offline, or I need to pay $500 to get some bigger computer to host it than the one I'm currently using. As soon as you're in that trap, you have to become big, or you have to disappear. And if you go for the peer-to-peer style, then you have very different structural incentives. So like secure scuttlebutt is a completely distributed social network. It was invented by this guy who lived on a sailboat, and so it's what they call offline first, which is that it never expects everybody to be accessible. There's the expectation that you might occasionally just sync up with all your friends, and then you'll go into a cave somewhere with your laptop and spend 6 months writing replies to all the things you download, and you come back, right? And that has extremely different incentives, because it's actually a lot more human. There isn't such a fast pace, and that affects like the way posts are ranked, not just the content you see, but the order in which you see it, the set of operations that you're expected to do. Like, they have a like button, but actually a lot of the interactions are comments, and you don't have this situation where you have some posts that are extremely wildly popular and some posts that aren't. You have a little bit of the rich get richer phenomenon, just because of the tendency to the fact that if somebody interacts with the post, then people who are following them will see it. But what you don't have is an algorithm saying, this post is getting hot, so I'm going to show it to way more people, and I'm going to put it at the top of everything. And then if you don't have that, you get a much more even distribution of popularity, and a much lower, much more vibing, let's say.
I'm thinking of the Borges story. Are you familiar with the lottery in Babylon?
Lottery in Babylon? No, I'm not.
So in this Borges story, it's like this society where they've decided to just let every aspect of their lives be controlled by a lottery, right? So one day you might get the Beth card and you'll become a king, and then another day you'll get the Gimel card, and it's of course the Hebrew alphabet because he's playing on the Kabbalah, and you'll become a pauper, right? But then the citizens of Babylon in this allegory, right, they decided, well, if we want to really make it fair, we have to take the lottery off of the screen, and put it, kind of backstage, right? So all of these, decisions that are happening that randomly determine all of the factors in our lives. It's kind of an allegory, I feel like, in the modern age for the way that we have kind of ceded control of our lives to the algorithms of these social media networks that are deciding where we're going to direct our attention. So I'm keeping my eye on the time here. I'm definitely going to look forward to bringing you back. I feel like we can talk a lot about the origins of this stuff and my Renaissance guys, right? And the way that people like Raymond Lull were kind of prefiguring these systems of kind of procedurally generating thought. But let me give you a chance to tell us where can we read more about this? I understand you've written some on hypertext.
Yeah, I have. So yeah, because Ted didn't make kind of a technical introduction, I wrote the technical introduction that I wish I had read years and years ago, and I called it The Engineer's Guide to the Docuverse. And if you go to my website, you'll see a kind of a whole host of articles, and that is up there, so you can read it, and it kind of gives you the whole, all of these Xanadu technologies that I worked on or worked with ever, even before joining Xanadu, are explained to some degree in there. So my website is www.lord-enke.net. And I also there I have other Xanadu stuff available. And I have, non-Xanadu hypertext related and kind of computer, how should I say this, computer politics, power, people's computer company kind of power to the users type stuff there. So
I was thinking a lot while you were talking about Doug Rushkoff's what's his book, You Are Not the Product or something like that.
I should say Computer Lib. This is actually Ted Nelson's book from the mid-70s.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's a cool one to read.
It's a very dense,
wow.
as you can see.
Yeah, that's some design challenges right there.
Yeah.
Well, so that gives us a place to start. I'm trying to think how best we can use these last few minutes. So a lot of my friends who I'm inviting to check this out are games people. And how is studying hypertext going to help us to become, for example, better Twine authors?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. Because I have done I've done VNs, but I'm kind of more on the research type side rather than the game side when it comes to hypertext. But hypertext has this connection with the there's not just the hypertext interactive fiction stuff, but also there's this whole connection to the narrative-based genre, and also in Twine, a commonly used form of hypertext that is in Twine that doesn't get a lot of use in the web is stretch text. That's when you have a link, and what it'll do is when you click the link, it replaces the text of the link with a longer version of the text of the link, a more elaborate version. So kind of looking into, well, narrow bases are kind of more in line with the research, the hermeneutic type thing. And there are a lot of interesting games that use narrow bases, none that have so like her story and analog a hate story and things like that. None that I'm aware of that actually use parallel visible connections and so on. But if you look into the history of specifically Ted Nelson's hypertext stuff, it's possible to get insights on how you might, new features to add in to a kind of interactive story, especially one that is kind of a mystery or based on building up a sense of an existing world.
That's where the meaning making features of hypertext come in.
Yes.
Because like a detective's always trying to figure out, piece together the story of what happened. So where else can we read about sort of the history of all this?
Ted Nelson's autobiography is here, Possiplex. He's got a bit of an ego, so keep that in mind when you read this. This is him, 100% embracing that, but it is more detailed than basically any other source. If you go to zandu.com.au, there is this is by Andrew Pam, who is also worked on Zandu around the same time I did, and he has a lot of historical articles. There's a wonderful book by Belinda Barnett called Memory Machines, which unfortunately, that's academic publisher, so it's quite expensive. But if you can get a copy of that, that's wonderful, and it goes over not just Doug Engelbart and Ted Nelson, but Andrew Van Dam and also Vannevar Bush. And then also very useful are histories of information organization in general. So that's like James Gleick's The Information is wonderful. And Alex Wright has two books that are great. One is called Glute, which is a general history, and then the other is called Cataloging the World, which is about a pre-computer hypertext system from Belgium by a guy named Paul Outlet, who had been at the end of the 19th century involved in library cataloging, so things like the Dewey Decimal System. And he kind of expanded, he took the card catalog kind of as far as it would go, turned it into kind of like a query language. So all of that is very interesting, and I really hope that people start thinking of hypertext in terms of the continuous history of information rather than as just a computer thing.
So I'm going to ask one more question, as a Mondo 2000 fan, right? Back in the 90s, we were all so excited about the possibilities of cyberculture, right? And we dedicated a certain amount of our career to, all this kind of computer storytelling stuff. But a lot of the stuff we were excited and hopeful for never really came to pass. And, we've ended up with, the hell that is today's social media companies. So what do you think is left in terms of like the hope or the potential for resistance in cyberculture?
Again, I'm going to come back to the impact of consumerization. Basically, that if your bottom line is based on delivering an experience, you're going to be conservative. And so I think the future doesn't lie with companies. I think the future lies with individuals and small groups doing weird experiments for themselves and their friends, never expecting it to scale up. And the best possible scenario is that we let 1,000 flowers bloom, and then some of them end up being used in a way where their use can scale up without being centralized. Because as soon as we centralize, then there's big money involved. And just like with, blockbuster movies, once there's big money involved, any risk that's being made is only being made by accident.
So just because there's no mass market counterculture that we can rely on, everybody complains, oh, there's no more counterculture potential anymore. It's only because we're looking for a sort of commoditized mass culture movement and that sort of thing
Yeah.
isn't going to work anymore.
Exactly.
That doesn't mean we can't go be mad scientists in our basements and cook good stuff up. Thank you. Thank you, John, for being here. And, I'll leave my viewers with the usual exhortation to be curious. We'll see you next time.
Yep. See you.